The Spanish-American War begins. Before you can understand the U.S. occupation of the Philippines, you need to know what imperialism is. This is whenever powerful nations attempt to control the economic and political affairs of a weaker people, either by colonization, force, or manipulation. In the early days of American colonization, Spain controlled most of Middle and South America. As a result, much of the area south of the United States is Catholic and speaks Spanish. As the 19th century heated up, Spain began losing its colonies in the Americas, one by one, some through struggles, while other areas were let go to avoid a fight. By 1890, this once vast empire consisted of merely Cuba and Puerto Rico. While the Progressive Era was going strong in the United States, a revolt broke out in Cuba in 1895. A Spanish general by the name of Valeriano Weyler was in charge of putting down the revolt. Thousands of Cuban nationalists were imprisoned, and tens of thousands died as a result of the brutal treatment. Most Americans wouldn't have cared about what was going on in Cuba, but times were changing in America as well. Two opposing journalists fought a duel with one another in their coverage of the situation in Cuba. They were Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. In order to sell newspapers, they engaged in yellow journalism. This is a style of writing to try and stir up emotions in an attempt to sell newspapers. Public opinion forced President William McKinley to take action. In January of 1898, McKinley sent a vessel, the USS Maine, to Havana Harbor in Cuba to warn Spain that America cared about the situation there, as Cuba lies a mere 90 miles from Florida. In the late evening hours of February the 14th, 1898, the battleship Maine exploded, killing 260 American sailors. The yellow journalists fanned the flames with headlines such as, "Remember the Maine." Spain was given the blame for the explosion, and Americans began calling for action. On April the 20th, 1898, McKinley declared Cuba to be independent. On April 25th, Congress declared war on Spain. What followed was a 4-month conflict that never should have happened. The action began with Commodore George Dewey setting sail for the Philippines. He was already stationed in that part of the world in one of those incidents that was supposed to look like a coincidence, but was blatantly obvious. A man who had previously been Assistant Secretary to the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt, had made it clear. "I say if we ever go to war with Spain, take the Philippines." To put it bluntly, Spain held the Philippines, and the United States of America wanted it. Once notified of the war, Commodore Dewey had his men paint all of these ships. Once a bright white, the vessels now were covered with a dull gray to make them less visible to the enemy. Dewey ordered everything made of wood, including the piano of his flagship, Olympia, tossed over the side. Splintered wood presented a much greater danger to his crew than enemy shells. With chairs and tables bobbing in the water behind them, the ships went to seek out the Spanish fleet. What ensued in the Philippines was the Battle of Manila Bay, but it wasn't much of a contest. America's ironclad battleships began lobbing shells at the Spanish flotillas, and the devastating destruction began. After making 8 rounds around the Spanish fleet, the Spanish presence in the area ceased to exist. Spain suffered 380 dead and wounded. 8 Americans had minor wounds, and 1 sailor died of a heat stroke. On top of that, all Spanish naval power in that part of the Pacific was now gone. George Dewey became an overnight hero. But that wasn't the end of the story in the Philippines. The rebelling forces there were led by a man named Emilio Aguinaldo. He wanted independence from Spain and everyone else. This posed a conflict of interest. America wanted possession of the islands, but so did the Filipinos. Aguinaldo was happy to see American sailors at first, but he soon began to grasp the situation. Spain had felt that they could hold the Philippines, that is, until the Americans showed up. To save pride, Spain hoped to fight and lose the territory to the Americans, not their former subjects. So a skirmish known as the Battle of Manila was arranged, which Aguinaldo knew nothing about. At the said hour, the Americans bombarded and then stormed over the barracks of Manila, resulting in 40 Spanish soldiers being killed. The U.S. then set out to subdue the Filipinos, which controlled most of the Philippine Islands. Detention camps for Filipinos were established around the islands, and 20,000 Filipino soldiers perished fighting the occupying U.S. forces. Over 200,000 Filipinos died due to disease or starvation during the conflict, while U.S. casualties numbered around 6,000. Over 70,000 U.S. troops saw combat during the conflict. Eventually, Aguinaldo was captured and the Philippines became a U.S. territory, thus making the United States of America an imperial power for the first time.